Hey Algebra 2 class, welcome to lesson 51 and lesson 52. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you, you really need to pay attention to the details of these two lessons because they can get a little tricky, okay? So this is like one of the first times, right, that I'm not going to come to you and say like, oh, it's easy, let me explain it. It's not that it's not easy, but it's not that it's not hard either, I guess you could say, right? There's a lot of things to remember and things to process. So please make sure that you're processing the information. The first thing I want to show you, and this one right here, you really want to write down somewhere. But the first thing I want to show you for lesson 51 is going to be the base of what we're talking about. There's 3 square root rules that you need to understand because this one right here surprises me every time, okay? And then I'm going to teach you this thing over here, okay? But this is the information that's the base of what we're doing, okay? If you are multiplying the square root of one number by the square root of another number, that's what these m and n represent, you're going to multiply this m and n together to get the square root of m and n multiplied together, okay? That's one rule. We already know that rule, okay? And you're going to see it right here on letter A. For example, 1. If you're multiplying square root of 3 times square root of 2, you're going to get square root of what? 6, because 3 times 2 is 6. So that rule is really, really easy, okay? Now, letter B. You're going to be multiplying the square root of 3 times the square root of negative 2. Again, same thing over right here. If you're going to multiply one positive number by one negative number, you're going to do the same thing as over here. You just multiply them together. Negative 2 times negative 3. Pardon, negative 2 times 3 is a negative 6. So you get square root negative 6. Okay? So, over here though is where I get like very surprised because look, you would think you have a negative 3 and a negative 2. Well, negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. Square root 6. Bada bing, bada boom, you're done. No. Look at the rule. When you're multiplying a negative number by another negative number, you're going to take that negative and put it on the outside and multiply the numbers on the inside together. So you're just going to do negative 3 times negative 2 means that you have a negative on the outside, square root 6. 3 times 2 equals 6. Okay, so you have to keep that negative there, which no one would expect to do, but it's a rule for square roots. Okay? Okay, now here's the next thing I'm going to surprise you with. This right here, the square root negative 6, is impossible. It's impossible. Because think about it. What two equal numbers can you multiply together to get a negative number? You can't. Like let's say that you have 2 and 2. 2 times 2 equals 4, right? Those are 2 equal numbers equals 4, so the square root of 4 is 2, right? But let's say that you want the square root of negative 4. What are you going to do? Negative 2 times negative 2? You're always going to get a positive 4. You will never find 2 equal numbers together that will multiply together to give you negative 2. To give you a negative number. You could do positive 2 and negative 2, and that will give you a negative 4, but then it's not a square root because those two numbers aren't equal. They have different signs, right? So you will never lograr to find a number, a square root that exists that can be negative. And that's where we learn the letter I, okay? The letter I means imaginary. So let's take this negative 6 thing. Mathematicians say it is impossible to write a number like this because this does not exist. Okay? So what you're going to write it like is this. It's 6 times negative 1. Right? Don't you agree that negative 6 is 6 times negative 1? Now this part right here is not what you're going to write. This part is the understanding behind it. Which means when you have here, you have the square root of 6 times the square root of negative 1, right? Now I just told you you can't take the square root of a negative number. Pues está bien. Because the square root of negative 1 equals I. Because it's imaginary. So if you wanted to write the square root of negative 6, you were going to write it like this. Square root of 6, I. okay? You convert the negative square root 1. Okay, you convert the negative square root, this part right here, you convert that into an I. So you have square root of 6 times I. Because that I right there represents, and I can write right here, the square root of negative 1. Okay? The square root of negative 1. Okay. I hope you believe me when we say that. We're going to do example 2 so you can feel confident with that concept, because then I can teach you about this thing right here. The I squared equals negative 1. Okay? Here we go. Let's do example 2. Let me write them up on the board. We have A is negative square root of negative 13, B square root of negative 4, C square root of 3 times the square root of negative 2. Okay. So here we go. It says use Euler's notation. And Euler's notation is what I just taught you. Okay, so if you see that, that means do what I just taught you to do with the I. Can you take the square root of 13? No. So you're going to write this one with the negative right there. You're going to write square root of 13 and convert that negative square root into an I. Square root 13I. Okay? Don't be in panico yet. Because if you're in panico now, it's just because I scared you to say that. It's not super easy, and you need to go back and process it then, okay? Because this part's still pretty straightforward, okay? You cannot take the negative of a square root, so you convert that negative part into an I, okay? So look over here. Can you take the square root of 4? Yes, you can. So the square root of 4 is 2, but then you convert that negative square root part into an I. And your answer is 2I. Okay, look at example 3. You're going to do square root of 3 times square root of 2 is going to be a square root of negative 6. You can't take the square root of negative 6, so what are you going to do? You do the square root of 6 and convert the negative square root into an I. And you get square root 6I. Okay? If you're looking at the book, they just do it out of base. They convert this into square root 2I first, because you can't take that negative, and then they multiply it by the square root of 3. You can do it either way. Okay? We're still not quite ready to see the I squared thing yet. So let me put up example 3 and 4, and then introduce you to when you're going to need that I squared thing. Okay, now in these, all we're doing, honestly, when you see adding and subtracting with imaginary numbers, you're basically just treating them like an X, okay? Until we start to see some multiplying of I's, okay? When we start to see some multiplying of I's, when the I's are pegados or they're being distributed, that's when things start to get a little crazy, okay? So these two are super easy because you can just look at the I like it is an X. So yes, combine like terms. 4 minus 2 is 2. All my markers are dying. 4 minus 2 is 2. 6I plus 3I is 9I. And that's your answer for example 3. Then you have this one. First thing you have to do though is you have to make sure you distribute this negative. Okay, if things are in parentheses, you can't just go for it because this has to become, okay, this is negative 2. And this is positive 5I. Okay, that part you need to distribute. So here we go, we got 4 plus 6 minus 2, right? 4 plus 6 minus 2 for the normal numbers, that's going to be 8. Then you have negative 3i, negative 4i, and positive 5i. So negative 3 minus minus 4 is negative 7. Negative 7 plus 5 is negative 2i. And that's your answer, 8 minus 2i. Okay? And now I'm going to show you the I squared thing with this next example of example 5. I don't need to stop the video. I'm just going to put it up there really quickly. Here we go. Example 5 says, you have 2 and then I minus 3I plus 2I minus 4 minus negative 4, like that. Okay. I would would say the first thing that you want to do is I'm going to get everything as simple as I can. Getting everything as simple as you can means that you're going to write every number basically with just one I or no I's. Okay, that is your goal. Well, how are we going to do that? Let me move this down here for a second. I squared equals -1. Why? Why is taking 2 i's going to equal a -1? Okay, here's why. I squared means this. You have square root of -1 times the square root of -1. Right? What are you going to do when you do the square root of -1 times the square root of -1? We already told you it's going to go negative square root 1. Because 1 times 1 is 1, and then you take the negative and put it on the outside. So, what's the square root of 1? 1. So what's your answer? -1. Okay? Okay, so knowing that we have I squared equals -1, let's go through and do this problem. Okay? We have 2i squared is what we have. 2 and then 2 i's, right? Okay, well, I squared is -1, so we're going to write it like this. 2 times -1, okay? Minus 3. Now we have 3 i's. Well, 2 i's equals -1, and then we have 1 I left. And we can have that I left. We don't need to do anything with it, okay? So you convert the 2 i's together into -1 and leave the other I there. So just like this, cross it out, make it -1, cross these out, make it -1. Okay, what are you left with? -3 and -1, and I. Then you have plus 2i, minus 4, and then minus, and look what you have right here, square root of -4. Square root of 4 is 2, and then convert the negative square root into an I. Okay? Then we finish distributing. 2 times -2 is -2, and we've heard it 2 times -1 is -2. -3 times -1, positive 3. I. Don't forget your I because it's right there. Plus 2i minus 4 minus 2i. Okay. Then we combine our like terms. I have -2 and -4 is going to give me a -6. Plus 3i plus 2i is 5i minus 2i is 3i. So here's your answer. -6 plus 3i. Okay? Process it again, right? Every 2 i's equals a -1. Every 2 i's equals a -1. So you have to go through, simplify it down to either a number without an I or just one I. Then combine your like terms. Okay? Let's go ahead and do example 5 then. Pardon, example 6. Example 6 is the exact same thing, but instead of writing out the i's pegado like that, they're going to write them in square roots, which is really how you're going to see them. The first example is just to help you understand where all of that is coming from. Okay? So, here we go. We have 3i to the third. Okay, well remember, 3i to the third means that you have one pair of i's. So how are we going to write that? 3 times the -1 I, right? Because you took out the I squared, which equals -1 right here, and you're left with one more I. Plus, this is 2i squared, so it's going to be 2 times -1. Plus 7i plus 4, and then look at this one though, 2i to the 5th. In I to the 5th, you don't have 2 pares of i's, you don't have one pair of i's, you have 2. Because remember, you would write you would write that like this, I, right? So you go 2, let's go 2 times, 2 i's equals -1, cross them out. Other 2 i's equals -1, cross it out, and then you have an I left, okay? So you have to look at this 5 as having 2 pairs. You have I squared, then I to the 4th, then you're left with just 1, okay? If you're like, Miss Jessica, I don't know what you're saying, write out your little i's, cross 2 out to make -1, cross 2 more out to make -1, and you're left with that I. And do that until it, boom, clicks in your brain and you have the light bulb come on, okay? So here we go, let's go through and simplify all this. We have 3 times -1 is -3i, plus 2 times -1 is -2, plus 7i plus 4 plus 2 times -1 is -2 times -1 is 2i. Okay? So then, you have I. Negative 3 plus 7 is 4i. 4i plus 2i is 6i. Negative 2 plus 4 is 2. So you have 6i plus 2 is your answer. Okay, go ahead and try your practice to make sure you understand all those concepts that we're throwing at you. And then if not, then you can watch the explanation and see if it makes sense.